Hello and welcome. In today's session, we're going to look at how the ePerspectives digital enterprise method and framework can be supported by a world-leading tool in enterprise architecture and portfolio management, as well as business modeling, how the tools can support the method, and how the two of them will be greatly in tandem to provide the right platform for digital transformation. I'm Arsalan Rad. Let's start by looking at our agenda. So first today we're going to look at why digital transformation is important and what it entails. Then we're going to discuss how we can simplify digital transformation journey, leveraging the ePerspective digital enterprise method and framework. Then we're going to look at Software AG, which is a German company. They are the second largest software company after SAP and one of the world leading tool providers in enterprise architecture and business architecture and enterprise planning and portfolio management, amongst other things. And the method and framework has been adopted by Software AG and very successfully leveraged in strategic key initiatives that have excellent feedback. Then we're going to show how the method and the tool work together, how everything that the method provides is indeed it's like almost on a one by one relationship is reflected in the tool. And last but not least, obviously, everybody can have good methods and tools, but if we don't have the right approach and the right way of doing this, then it will probably not yield the result we're looking for. So we're going to talk about how we can use, if you're planning to adopt, like the best best practice enterprise architecture or digital transformation capability, then how you do that, and at the same time with the best tool, the right tool that supports this, how do you do that so you establish the right platform, the right vehicle for your digital transformation journey. In this case, we'll be talking about ePerspectives with Software AG, which tooling, both of which I would recommend as very highly. So let's look at first why the digital transformation is so important. We have covered this before, so we really need to understand one thing, that a digital company is not one that has acquired a lot of digital technology. Let's get that agreed first. So because you see a lot of companies doing AI solutions, machine learning, getting IoT solutions and such, and then they consider themselves digital. No, you really need to make the shift from the old traditional enterprise paradigm to the new one, so to get all the benefits that a digital enterprise brings, such as agility in business, the speed, time to market, communication, governance, and everything else. So it's important to note that many digital transformation initiatives encounter really big challenges, as McKinsey here says here, that they're sometimes even bigger challenges than when dealing with the traditional organizations. So this is as an imperative here that we need a way, a platform, a method and tool and an attitude and the right vehicle, whatever you want to call it, that facilitates this. And this definitely by no means can be yet another tedious method that only technical people or architects or some specific group of people can understand. But this needs to be something that everybody can, like that electronic circuit, they can all agree on and therefore sing from the same hymn sheet. So in order to better understand that, we looked at the paradigm shift when we went between the old analog electronic circuits, which looked something like this in their better forms. You may have seen pictures of even older electronic equipments when their cables are just all over the place. And that what the problem is here is that you can simply not have flexibility. You cannot replace a component easily. If you're going to do something, it takes time. If you remove a given element or a component, it's very hard to say who else might depend on it, where else in the system there might be dependency on it. So we might be fixing something while we aren't fixing something else. So all the problems that you can imagine are in here. They're similar to a traditional enterprise, if you will, that it's the same: tedious, too many connections, difficult to have speed and flexibility, and all the nice things that we look for. So therefore, there was a paradigm shift where we moved to digital and with IC circuits and such. So what is the difference? Now we have an environment which is sequential, it's traceable, it's componentized, encapsulated, if you will. So essentially, we can look at a given point and see if we have current there. And if we don't have it in the previous point, then we know that there's a fault lying in that connection. So it's really different to approach. Why? Because we have a reliable circuit diagram that tells us where things are, and things are componentized. So we don't need to get inside of them. If you recall, we had the analogy of a vending machine, that when we interact with the vending machine, we don't care what's inside of it, all the science and engineering inside of it. All we want to know is how to use the interface, i.e. using a coin and pressing the right choice, and then basically we get the product that we're looking for. That's encapsulation. So at the same thing you can consider for business enterprises, that we have too many entities intertwined with too many connections between them. You have people of a given role, or if you will, function, that go across different functions for no reason, and it's very hard to find people's places. And on top of that, then you add, so also you have different mindset, different people, depending on where they work, they have different terminologies, way of speaking and such, and that's very difficult to consolidate, as you can guess. And on top of it, add to the top picture the ongoing dynamics of ongoing projects, and you have BPM, agile development, maintenance, all these things together. It just becomes a nightmare to oversee, to manage, but most importantly, to distill, to understand reliably, to make decisions. And most importantly, it's very difficult for it to be flexible. So we don't want that. I mean, we talked about moving to a similar use of a method and framework in a similar paradigm. So we have the ePerspectives method and framework, which you can argue is it's an adaptation of a framework like TOGAF. As we talked about, we do have a presentation about ePerspectives and TOGAF, the synergies and the differences, but you can see on the EA Transform website. But nevertheless, the most important thing is that TOGAF, as the open group themselves highlight this, is not a practical guide that you can take into engagements and run with it and execute things with, and you need adaptation of it. And you can say that ePerspectives is a very practical and pragmatic, exact to-do guide of, like version of TOGAF, if you will. So we have, again, componentized parts. We have different parts of what we do componentized. We go by black boxing, so anything that is within a component, then it's only the concern of that given the perspective that component belongs to. So basically, we have the notion of perspectives that make things cohesive for us. So people, science, tools, everything that goes within one perspective, it's only dedicated to that perspective. So and the important feature that the ePerspectives provides is separating internal and external. So basically, anything internal, we don't want anybody else to know about it. We just work on it to get some output out of it, and it's that output that others depend on that we use to communicate with others and have an end-to-end system. So this basically is why perspectives are needed, because there are so many different perspectives at a business organization. So what we want to do is not to mix them. What we want to do is to keep them separated and only focus, just like an electronic circuit, only focus on the interaction points and interfaces between them. And as long as we take care of that, then if we assume everybody within with their own perspectives do the right thing and provide the right output, then we should be fine. We don't need to get into everybody's world and perspective. We don't need all people to communicate to one another, as we will demonstrate later. So we have all these layers from business strategy to organization, process, data and application, IT infrastructure as we implement everything. So using this really is important, that we have perspectives and we keep things nicely separated so they don't mix too badly. So now let's look at the next session. At this session, we're going to look at how the ePerspectives digital enterprise method and framework simplifies and accelerates digital transformation. On the site eatransform.com, you can see more comprehensive versions of this presentation, more detailed. But in here, we will try to accelerate this and before we get into the tooling discussion. So as we just mentioned, we want to make a shift similar to the electronic world, when there was a shift from the analog to the digital electronic world, when things are componentized, clear, where we know where to find them, they are sequential, they are traceable, and bring us all those advantages of removing a component and placing another one, as long as we maintain the interface. The same thing we talked about, that we want a method and framework. We want a digital enterprise by definition. So we use ePerspectives that componentize, that uses exact same paradigm, same approach, and componentizes things and uses one circuit diagram for business, if you will, where things are traceable and we can see the input and outputs and interactions and sequences and follow things, hence getting a great degree of oversight, traceability, and basically also business being in charge. So this is ePerspectives. We talked about this being like an electronic circuit. This is the main picture for ePerspectives that we will get into a little bit more. But this, again, if you look at these different layers and the different aspects and perspectives that we gotta look at. Here's an example, and this is a perspective-based approach to regulatory compliance. So this is important. I wanted to put this slide in that, again, we've seen a lot of times that somebody comes and sells a package or application that claims to magically solve a big companies, big enterprises, regulatory compliance issues. That's not going to happen, really. If you haven't seen it already, I'm sure you will eventually. I hope you won't be at the wrong end of that experience. But yes, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. As long as we don't know the business strategy, business operating model, it's not stable and everybody can rely on it, and that drives things. If you don't know that, it's silly when we have compliance and people come and say, I've got a package, where are we going to put this as an application? In the lower layer, in the data and application layer or infrastructure layer, then how will it have the right access to the process and the strategy and such? So this is very important, to have this perspective-based approach. So here's ePerspectives as a framework, and we'll have an animation here. So what do we look at? We look at three different key perspectives of business, enterprise, and change that are supported by two parallel overarching, if you will, perspectives of enterprise planning and operations. You can use the acronym BCEO, so business, enterprise, change, enterprise planning, and operations. So what's in business perspective? So again, important that we keep everything in the right perspective and we don't mix them together. Componentized, let's keep things where they belong, and let's not throw them all over the place, otherwise we will have big problems. So what is the business perspective entail? In there we have two sub-perspectives of business strategy and business design. Business strategy, without getting into the complexity of the What business strategy means, let's put it simple. Business strategy is there for us to understand what the business wants to do, how it wants to interact with the outside world, how it wants to be unique. So what's our identity, basically, right? So the next is, once we figure that out, the next is, okay, I know what I want to do. Now, what business operation model do I put in place to best satisfy that? Right, so that comes where when we do the business design, we're dealing with the how. Then we have the enterprise perspective, right? So what did we say? The important thing about business perspective, when we deal with it, it's agnostic to implementation, right? So everything here is business. We don't want to be impeded or constrained by today's limitations, for example, that we have lower budget or we don't have the right access to technology or skills, and then come up with a wrong business design that is not optimal for future. After all, our constraints can have been gone, can disappear in some time from now, and we don't want to have a business that is business strategy and design that is flawed. So while business perspective is agnostic to implementation, it's the enterprise perspective that now has the job of, okay, we figured out what the business wants to do and how it wants to do it. Now, what is it that is the ecosystem and environment, all of it that we're going to put in place in terms of the IT and technology and the organization and everything else that needs to be in place in order to implement the business, as we can say, implement or deploy the business, make it implementable in an optimized fashion. And then, last but not least, is the change perspective. Here we look at, it's important we define change as baseline plus delta. So obviously that goes without saying. So if we have a change, so basically when we have the business perspective tells us everything that stabilizes what the business wants to achieve and how it wants to achieve it, agnostic to implementation. Then we come with the enterprise perspective that comes with an implementation approach based on our capabilities, what we have, our constraints and priorities and our budgets and everything else, puts in place an optimized ecosystem and environment that can satisfy for us to do what the business defined for us that we need to be doing, right? So that's our baseline. But then changes come. Business gets a new idea and wants to apply that. We want to go to a new market or introduce a new product, or going from a product-based model to a service-based model, for example. So when that happens, we need to find that change. What is the difference? We're not obviously going to change everything. So we got to find where the gap is, where that delta is. So we look at the business perspective. Is there a delta there? If there, we identify it, the same as enterprise perspective. Is there a delta there? So we find the delta. So this delta is what we need to apply as change. So again, this is why we define the baseline plus delta becomes change. And in change, we first start by doing change planning, as we will explain, before we do change realization. What goes inside the business perspective and its sub-perspectives? Now I'm going to ask you this. Anybody whose primary role is in the enterprise perspective or change perspective, in fact, even business design, for example, as I'm going to be talking about business strategy, you have every right now to switch off, unless you're curious, just as a general knowledge. Why? Because again, it's important. Every sub-perspective or every perspective encapsulates all its science and activities and methods, everything that it does. All that rigor is encapsulated like a black box. We don't want to bother other people with it. We don't want a business strategy person sitting at the same time with a program management, change management person, for example, or a enterprise architecture person sitting and discussing business strategy and how they use what techniques and models to get it. That really would be something we want to avoid in order to simplify life. So just for those who are working within business strategy sub-perspective or those who are curious, we look at what is it we do here. We look at business strategy. We got to figure out what we want to be and how we want to be what we are, and what markets, who are our competitors, like what products we want to sell, what services we want to provide, all that stuff. So there are methods such as Lean Sigma, such as Six Sigma. We have MIT's Enterprise Strategic Analysis and Transformation, ESAT, techniques like TQM and such. So supply chain optimization, competitive analysis techniques, balanced scorecards, all that nicety, right? But again, the good thing about it is we leave it to those who are expert, right? They work on this, but we've seen this in many places that this work normally becomes, like if, up in the clouds somewhere, it's on a different abstraction and can't go downstream. Nobody can work with it. Like, it's a very impressive, very expensive piece of work on strategy, but we don't know how to feed off it and feed it downstream so that our IT, our organization, our enterprise architect, everything else is done accordingly. So we will get around to how we get around that. And you see in the next box we have distillation of strategy. Now we can use, this is where we actually distill that. So we can use techniques such as business canvas modeling. All these will be explained on the eatransform.com. We will have videos and we will have documents that better elaborate on this, that are freely available. So business canvas modeling helps us in an accelerated way distill our strategy, and it's often also a way to get accelerated strategy in many places where there's no either there hasn't been a strategy definition or development, or if it has, it sort of has gone to those clouds, to some shelfware that somebody paid a lot of money for, and nobody knows what to do with it. So I often say, well, we got to ask our strategy consultants that, as minimum, keep all that science, but as minimum, what I need is what you see as the second one in the second box. That is an X matrix. That's what does it do? It links together for us our strategic capability to, it's a four-way matrix. So it connects them to strategic values, strategic objectives, and most importantly to metrics in terms of KPIs or key performance indicators. So what do we do here? We look at our strategic high-level capabilities, the key capabilities that we need to do. If it's a service or a capability, let's not get into that technical discussion now, but these are the capabilities that we need in place in order to provide what we want to do to the outside world. So we take those strategic capabilities, and with an X matrix, we map it to as minimum to KPIs, but also there through to strategic objectives as such. Why we do that? The important thing here is that we get strategic capabilities linked to business value. So from now on, that is a foundation that everything will be built on, as you will see. So we need to be able to measure them eventually. So this is what we do, but here's the good news. Whoever does this work, it's black box from the rest. So all that matters here is how do we get the output out of it, which is an X matrix with a strategic capability model, right? So we have a strategic capability model, as you see, that has been mapped to business value through KPIs. So this is the only product that matters from this sub-perspective. The rest is internal science. Let's not get into that, and nobody else has to. And the people who are inside that blue box really should not be going around having meetings with people of architecture and other places and discuss their methods and what they did, etc. But everything has to be, the only thing is this strategic capability model, which is the input. That is important. That will be the foundation for what goes into the next business perspective, sub-perspective, which is business design. Now, as I mentioned, in business design, we're going to figure out, we know what the business wants to achieve, and B, now we're going to say how, and that's a business operating model, the right processes, the right organization, and also the right customer experience as they interact with us. And that's when we talk about value stream mapping, customer journey. That is, look at your key customer journeys, look at the main value streams that provide the key value to our clients, and make sure that experience is optimized. So this is the true essence of the how-to that we do, right? And we capture the business, functionality, and structure. And I've said before, to me, you can have all the fancy definitions for architecture, but I would go by the following. It's the balancing act of fitting your functionality into the best structure, right? So the functionality and process is what we do, is the driving force, and the structure needs to follow, and not vice versa. Again, the good news is once all the science people who are expert in it do their stuff, and they do that, then it all becomes black box. As you noticed, we had the strategic capability model, which will be our starting point. Now we have elaborated and detailed, found more processes, decomposed, look at the process, look more at the entities and organization and such. As we do that iteratively and stabilize this, then we come up with what is called the business capability model, BCM. So it starts with as default with the strategic capability model, but now this is a much more detailed version. In fact, this is the encapsulation of our target business operating model, our business operating model, how we want to, how it's going to be. So our processes and what we do, and the organization. In fact, our future organization really should be something looking like our business capability model. Okay. Now we have the business capability model. The business perspective is done. The only thing that we consider others will care about and we have to know about is nothing about business perspective, nothing of all the science and all the fancy knowledge that is inside of it. No, all they need to do is have access to this the business capability model, right? And also, so when we are in the enterprise perspective, as mentioned, we have two key aspects of one of them IT and technology, and the other one organization, which is locations and resourcing and such, right? How do we put the right resourcing people and the technology and infrastructure, everything that needs to be in place in order to implement the business optimally? And here we also have access to the business side of things through the business capability model, like an electronic circuit. That is our input-output kind of place. And then we have also a link to the change portfolio, right? So we have insight into that. So how does that work? Again, they are all black boxed. So here again, we start, this is what we call an enterprise capability model. So how does that work? We start with the business capability model as default. But if you recall, business capability model is agnostic to implementation. Now we are in the enterprise capability model, and now we're going to implement it. How do we implement it? By profiling it from these key aspects of IT and technology, business value and role and profile, organization profile for the given capability, as well as the change portfolio. What are the changes that are happening that we need to take into account for that given capability, right? So this is, if you will, the implemented version of the business capability model, where every capability has been profiled in terms of implementation from those four aspects that we referred to. Now, we do this exercise of heat mapping. Once we have clearly found out what happens inside enterprise capability model. Now, what we have done, all the profiling, now what we call is this 4+1 what if scenario analysis that we use, and we look at every capability, do a 360-degree analysis assessment from a business value point, technology, organization, and change portfolio. And then we exercise heat mapping. So we see, okay, is this capability, for example, critical for us? Are we going to outsource this capability? So you have a very capability-centric approach to this, where we profile this. Now, that helps us devise what are our priorities. So the sub-map of enterprise capability model, if you will, the subset of it, where the changes, when we did the heat mapping and we decided where we are going to, in which capabilities we're going to apply changes, and according to what priority and order, that becomes where we see here in green in change capability model, or CCM. So that's a subset of ECM, which is dynamic now, which tells us what parts we're going to change and do some implementation with. And importantly, you've seen now the yellow thread, the golden thread in this case. So we don't care really, as you will see very soon, to look into inside of any component, any perspective. All we need to do focus is on this golden thread and nothing else. So anybody who has a job or a role that is within a given sub perspective only focuses on that, nothing else, right? So then they provide their input into the XCM, which is either SCM, BCM, ECM, or CCM. They provide the right input. That's all they need to do. And people like CEOs, COOs, CIOs, if there's a central portfolio kind of function and so on, those are the ones who need a holistic view and oversight. And for them, all that is needed is access to this golden thread, which is called the XCM, the X capability model, and nothing else, right? We will explain that in details. So when we come to the change capability model, what happens here is that we have a capability-driven approach to both solutioning and planning. This is really important to avoid, as we explain in detail when it comes to this sub-perspective, when we explain it in its own session on eatransform.com. We have here a very capability-centric approach. What does that mean? That only work comes out of a given capability. All the work for a given capability is with a focus team. And if your capability is payment, and somebody else is working, for example, on recruitment, right? And they need to somewhere take care of some sort of payment, right? This is how we avoid what happens in many organizations, that the recruitment component people will go and say, oh, I need some payment, so let's spend a lot of time defining functionalities. And heck, they sometimes go and even buy some applications and packages, which is a legacy, future legacy nightmare. So we don't want to do that. We want to maintain mutual integrity, so we have a very capability-driven or capability-centric approach to solutioning and planning. Once we do that, we have the greatest foundation, we black box it, and we have the change capability model that helps us drive the change implementation or realization. We break it into add, which is if you innovate and put something new and want to bring in something new, like for example AI or IoT and these kind of things. And this is where it is. This is why I said before, you can have a package. Those packages come around here. They don't come on top on the blue. So how can a package that comes here cover compliance for the entire enterprise? That just doesn't sound plausible. So yes, we have this adding and we have maintaining. So what we want to keep, we keep. And the challenge is whenever we have to improve something, right? That means change some things, keep some things, and that's we have to use coexistence approach. We have to have a multi-speed approach that makes sure that whatever we built as new, we bring or enhance and improve will not create the wrong impact on the rest of whatever we have. And this is similar to the electronic circuit analogy, that since we are componentized, we hopefully will avoid that issue. So everything black box, basically. And so if you look at it very briefly, we talked about the 4 evolutionary stages of the X capability model, XCM. So we talked about when it was called SCM, when we were working with business strategy, and they are high level. We're focusing on what does the business want to do and be, and based on that, we define our high level strategic capabilities and we map them to a business value through an X matrix typically, or whichever way we want to reference that. When we come to the next stage, or not next sub-perspective of business design perspective, we focus on BCM or business capability model. We start with the SCM or strategic capability model. Now we detail it, use process modeling techniques, org modeling techniques. We do that in iteration, process mapping, all that science as always, as well as customer journey modeling. All that knowledge, as we do that iteratively and we refine it, we stabilize that, that makes for us our business capability model, which is agnostic to implementation. This is if we had implementation, if we assume that everything about the implementation will be ideal, then this is our business. This gives us also the way we want to do business and the way our organization will look. Then we come to ECM. We start with the business capability model as default. As said, this was implementation agnostic. Now we implement it how? By profiling every capability from the point of view, not only IT technology and org and resourcing, but also its business value impact on business, as well as its impact on our change portfolio. So that is where we do a 360-degree 4+1 modeling, mapping, and profiling. So we get a enterprise capability model whose each and every capability has been fully profiled, accessibly and traceably, right? So we can look at that, and then, as mentioned, we do an exercise of heat mapping on this when we do this profiling and say, okay, are you an important capability? Are you competitive? Do you bring me competitive edge, for example? Are you just normal? Am I just gonna, for example, outsource you somewhere, so it's not my thought? So this is how we approach it, and that subset of the enterprise capability model, which tells us where changes are and the priorities thereof, that lays the foundation for our change capability model, which basically presents that subset of enterprise capability model, which now is going to go through change and implementation. So this is where we see it in action. So every perspective, as I mentioned, you see this in an Excel sheet, just for the sake of better demonstrating this. As you will see in this presentation, there is a great tool out there that can do this. So if you look at right now at the Excel sheet, you see on the light blue, you see a link to our strategic capability model. So you will see, like a way to derive strategic value on the left. It's a complex matrix, and you have the strategic capability on the second column. Then in the dark blue section, we have the metallization of the business capability model. So here we see the business capabilities. We can if you see the example, as we will do that on EA Transform in enterprise change and portfolio planning, capability-driven planning, you will see all this in detail with a real example from the telco world, from the ETOM telecoms framework. But for now, so you can basically click on a process and see its process map, see its specs, see its business rules and things like that, and also its customer journey for given processes. So this is, and then we have the capability to which a process belongs, basically. So we have business capabilities here. And then in the orange brown section that you see in the middle, we have the enterprise capability model, that every capability, as you see, will be mapped into those, the four of them. So data, application, and technology, architecture, but also organization, right? So organization and resourcing, those are the four columns that you see something with something in them a little bit more. But then also, as you can see through the yellow connecting lines on the top side, on the orange brown perspective, you see that it has two links, both to the business perspective and the change perspective. And in here, you see that clearly, because this is one document. They have been split, but it's one document. So one sheet, if you will, one Excel sheet. You can have individual tabs for each one of them. I'm talking Excel now, not tool yet, right? So what we have, it's just because I thought that many would be more comfortable, to see it more straightforward with Excel. So in here again, the enterprise capability model, as you see, is linked to green and is to blue. So you can look at every capability and say, enterprise capability, and do the 4+1. Basically, you can ask the question, okay, this capability of, for example, payment. Let me see. Okay, what's your IT data application? So I can go and look at what are the applications in scope for you. But then there too, I can click through that and say, okay, who's your vendor? What's the internal review of this vendor? What's the external review of this vendor? How long do I have a contract with this vendor? All the insight that is important for us to have in order to make qualified decisions, right? Make ROI-based, business case-based decisions, right? So same as there, we can look at the organization as it's done here, but also to the left and right links, we can say, okay, what is your business value? What is this capability's business value, right? If I'm looking at these sub-services, what is their total business value? And through the link on the right, top below right, the change link, we can also look at it, okay, for payment, what projects do we have, in what location, what places, using what technology, with what vendors that are currently touching on payment. So you see a total 360-degree analysis, fully insightful, and again, importantly, this is the single version of truth. So we will not have data spread all over the enterprise. Data will always reside behind the XCM, and those who want to consume it, they can consume it. If somebody has edit rights, then they have to be given that edit rights, and we have a mechanism that avoids, again, mutual integrity issues. So data will always have the right, correct version of it behind the XCM. So this is how the enterprise method and framework, as mentioned, helps us bring things to a little bit more of a clear state and have things in all their own place, like an electronic circuit. Now, in this next session, we're going to talk about Software AG's Alphabet and Aris. This is a product that I know well. I have worked with both the Center of Excellence, SMEs and experts, very much in terms of adopting the method into the tool, but I've also worked with the global executive team in terms of looking at how to best bring the power of the tool, but also with the right method to clients and to projects. So this is a general picture. This is just the idea to capture and say why we need tooling. As everything you just saw a moment ago in a very, Excel sheet that was very hard to see, everything like that, there are tools behind it. So we want better interfaces. We want to look at graphs, charts, get the data in a much better way that we can relate to and distill and analyze. So tooling is there, so everything that you saw in the 4+1 model in terms of all the 360 analysis to make qualified decision, hopefully we can achieve that by having the right tools in place. So looking at Software AG very briefly, one of the Gartner has consistently for, I think, 14, 15 years in a row, seen them as the leaders in the enterprise architecture and planning and portfolio management tooling. That you see the two different Gartner Magic Quadrants. The two key products are Aris and Alphabet. There are a number of other products, but the two key products that are relevant for our discussion here. So if you recall how we looked at the ePerspective digital enterprise framework like an electronic circuit, and we looked at its different elements and how they work, here is the beauty of it. And we talked about the perspectives. So business perspective, enterprise, and change perspective supported by two overarching perspective of enterprise planning and operations. We said that business perspective is agnostic to implementation. It focuses on first the business strategy, what we want to achieve and be to the outside world, and then come to business design, how we want to do that in terms of the operating model and the organization and the ways that we put in place to achieve that. Then the enterprise perspective looks at how to implement that implementation agnostic vision. And it looks at technology, infrastructure, tools, resources, people, everything else, and the planning, everything else that needs to be in place for this business to be operational the best way, be implemented. And it also, we talked about the change perspective, looked at change planning and change realization. We talked about the internal elements in the ePerspectives, and this is where we start seeing a total eclipse because the tool has been so greatly customized both ways, from both sides to fit together. So as you can see here, those bitmaps that you see here are all Software AG diagrams. So for what you just saw before in terms of ePerspectives, models and methods and and diagrams, in here you have all of them available in the Alphabet tooling, right? So then we talked about all that being black boxed, right? And it is encapsulated into a strategic capability model which lays out our high-level strategic capabilities, but also it gives us the mapping to the business strategy. So we can measure every capability has a strategic or business value, right? Now we looked at business design. In here, the focus is more on the product called Aris, and you see again the exact process, exact diagrams and models that are in the tool that exactly come in where ePerspectives had its own. And the same later. As we mentioned, it's all black boxed and encapsulated into a business capability model, and you see that in Alphabet again. So as we do the business modeling in Aris, the output in terms of the business capability model will be captured in Alphabet, and the two tools integrate very well together. Getting to the enterprise perspective, which is really where it matters most for the product Alphabet. This again, as we talked, we are looking at a business capability model. We have the right diagrams that the tool provides for doing data application and technology architecture, organization and resourcing, as well as change portfolio planning. So as we mentioned, that strategic capability model now has to become an enterprise capability model, where the business capability model has been mapped into implementation, if you will, from IT resourcing, but also from business value and change portfolio aspect. So again, Alphabet does that very well, and we can exercise heat mapping in the right diagrams. Everything is there. So as we do the heat mapping, we have a change capability model in ePerspectives, and you see a change capability model in Alphabet here. And you also have the possibility of doing capability-driven planning and solutioning. We'll get into every element very soon. And then finally doing, when this is done, we go for doing change realization and implementation. And in fact, in here, Software AG have a number of products in the IoT space and on the implementation space. We are not going to talk about them now, but there's also those that can be very relevant. So this is the picture. This is the full picture of ePerspectives, where every bitmap of ePerspectives method has been replaced by its corresponding diagram or technique from Software AG's tooling. Hence, we have a total eclipse. So therefore, you see perspective on one side, Software AG's tooling fit into perspectives. On the other, they are identical. There is a total eclipse, and there you can see how we go from the XCM, from the X capability model, into the real, like having the full oversight across the organization. And as you can see there, while we're mapping into an Excel sheet that you will see in excuse me, with Software AG, we use the right tooling instead of using Excel, which is much more efficient. So let's get into very quickly, go through all these different perspectives and see what we have here. Just a sample. So you have business strategy and analysis and development in ePerspectives, the whole light blue box. And here are some sample diagrams in Alphabet that help us capture and do the strategic analysis. There are a number of things, even like funnel analysis. There are a number of things. Again, we are trying to shield everybody else away from it. Remember, only if you're working or if your role is within this perspective do you need to know something, even a term called funnel analysis, right? So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that the things that we need to do for strategy development are supported by the tool, so we can get the right diagrams with the techniques in the tool. Then next we look at the strategy analysis and development, and in here you see the tool giving us that possibility to do that, to capture our business strategy in the right way, that it can be understandable for the next component, which I'll look at is how we distill business strategy. And in here you see in the tool, you see business canvas modeling, you see an X matrix that in fact has been implemented when we did the method and framework. Then the X matrix, which was recommended by us, was adopted by the tool, and everything that we needed here to do again. And then we come to a strategic capability model, which the tool has here and shows us how we capture our strategic capability. Moving on to the business perspective, second one, that is business design. In here, we first looked at business and organization models. In here, we have the product Aris with the classic process modeling and mapping tools, organization modeling is there, and obviously customer journey modeling is also available in the tool. So again, we use all this technique, only those who are involved with this perspective, nobody else. You don't need to go out and impress everybody by these models. In fact, if you can leave them as much as possible to their own perspective, you'll be doing them a great favor. But for those who are inside this, they understand these things, I'm sure. So we capture all these models in the tool, and then eventually, like we do customer, this is where we do the customer journey modeling and customer experience modeling, and then we, as I mentioned, encapsulate and capture everything we have discovered into a business capability model, which you see in Alphabet, in the product Alphabet, right? So everything that you can see in the tool. And here's another version of like the different views we can have, and this is where you can do business capability heat mapping. So you can say, okay, which are the critical business capabilities for me? This is a C-level kind of insight. So can I look at that? Can I see how that business capability is performing? What are the services, the outlook from different aspects and such, in order to make a better decision about our business operations. Next is enterprise perspective, which is the real big forte of the product Alphabet. And in here, we start looking at IT architecture, for example, that captures everything we know with all the different diagrams and models and reports. We can look at it. We look at the EP1, so data architecture. I will not get into each one of them, but just to be sure, this is just to show that everything that the method recommends, every bit, every little element in the method has its own correspondent element in the tooling of software AGs. So then we look at application architecture, different models and diagrams and capture. We have technology architecture. Then we look at organization and resourcing. The diagrams are a lot more impressive than that. These are like some small snippets, but you have really many. So you really go by your own favorite views, and it can also be customized. So you can get your own customized reports as well as your customized views. So in here we look at organization, looking at people and resourcing. Now we look at the resourcing and location again, how easily we can, it is for like if we're doing 4+1, we can look at the applicant, say, give me a report of all the instances of, for example, SAP that I have for these 3 locations or countries, for example, and then tell me what projects are being executed by them, what's the cost of the projects, and which people in the organization are involved with it, for example, and more importantly, or very importantly, what is the business value that entails, so that you can make the right decisions. This is what I have spoken before. The 4+1 model is the single most important artifact and document where we work. This is where we do our what-if scenario, our return on investment, ROI-based analysis and assessment. As mentioned, we look at every capability from the 4 different aspects of enterprise IT, so app, data, technology, from the organization point of view, but also we have links to business and business strategy as well as the change portfolio. So every capability has been profiled. So you can ask that question for a given, again, invoicing, for example. What people do I have? In what part of the organization that work on invoicing? And if you want, you can profile them further by looking at, okay, which ones are IT, which ones are internal, external, and such. What is even which ones would be prone to resisting change as you profile this, right? And then we have the business value, obviously. So invoicing, what are its sub-services and processes, and what is this capability worth? Tell me its KPIs for the whole capability together, but also for its different services. So if you're doing something, I know the business value and scope, but also at the same time, what are the projects that are currently happening in where that are touching upon invoicing. So if I want to do something with invoicing, maybe I should first figure out or know what we are doing somewhere else with it. maybe I can use that. Maybe I could, maybe in the best case scenario, they're doing it, so I could just wait and get the result of it, or we can combine resources to do that more efficiently. So in here we have also the same way we can do heat mapping. There's a heat map version of the enterprise capability model here when we look at red and yellow and green and all that, what is critical to us, what is important to us, and such to make decisions. Then we go to the change perspective. We talked about capability-driven change planning in total, in general, and these are the things that we need to do. Make sure that we get the right solutioning and right planning at all capability-driven, with reading of our CCM or change capability model. So we have more of this, more diagrams if you that can help you see get a better idea. And you can see it, for example, on change capability driven solutioning in specific. Maybe that's not because getting the solutioning idea is not necessarily what you put in the tool, your method, like how you're going to do that. You capture what you do in the tool, but not your method and such, but it can be captured to a good extent. So that we will talk about separately about solutioning. But when it comes to capability-driven planning, in fact, the tool is fantastic, very strong, and as you saw already in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, it's also in the top quadrant when it comes to capability-driven change and change planning. And then we look at prioritization and balancing. When we look at CCM, how we can look at the greens, we can look at different perspectives, so that in order to that we have a better idea how we want our implementation roadmap based on what priorities will it be devised. Then we look at a change capability model as per ePerspectives. This is what we use in order to drive our change and in fact implementation. Portfolio analysis, as I mentioned, the tool is very strong in portfolio analysis, so we can look at all different aspects for a given portfolio, like from a people point of view, technology, business, etc., to see different reports, all accurate and single version of truth, so we can make decisions. So that was a bit on Software AG's tooling. So in this session, in the following session, we're going to now be talking about if you plan to adopt method framework plus tool, right? How you do it. I've seen it in 25 years that I've been working in this with enterprise architecture and transformation. I don't recall too many EA initiatives being greatly successful when I have gone to them. So we really need to have a very clear approach. Not the book or TOGAF will not tell us how to do this. We need a very practical and pragmatic approach to implementing this, to actually adopting this together, the approach and the tool, the method and the tool together. So if you're going to use any other method or tool than ePerspectives and Software AG's Alphabet or Aris, still the next session will help you, hopefully, because the notion and the roadmap and approach is indeed agnostic, but hopefully whatever method and tool you work with would be as sensible and as easy to distill and understand and go to the right place as ePerspectives and Aris Alphabet combination. Whichever way, this we will focus now on how we do it. So when we look at EA driven digital transformation, how we want to do it plus tooling. So normally a typical endeavor or engagement starts, I forget the initiation phase, and then we start, first of all, we try to understand ePerspectives, its reference model, how it works, and then look at what has been used, if any, in that given environment, and make sure that we can adjust that to the right reference model, hopefully ePerspectives or the EA reference model, digital reference model, if you will, that you think is most suited to your purposes. Then the next is looking at the business perspective assessment and alignment. That is, then we do look at the business strategy, look at the business design. Now, if we don't have any, we have to have accelerated workshops to get them very fast, to distill them very fast. If we have some, then we have to dip into that in order to extract it, right? But we distilled, and what is it here? So we need to have an SCM, strategic capability model, and a business capability model as output product, as we discussed before, that are also mapped to business value. That's the output. What happens inside of it, again, is only for those who work with that perspective. Then we look at the target architecture, and this is now we're looking at enterprise architecture, so enterprise perspective. So we know what the business wants to do, business operating model, how it wants to do it. Now we're looking at, okay, if we want to implement it, what is the enterprise capability I need in place? So again, we look at the current, we can look at assess in a typical project, what is our current ECM enterprise capability model by doing a mapping of what we have on a 4+1 to a enterprise capability model. Once we do the mapping of current, what we have today as is, then we start looking at the target. So we map our target, if you will, architecture into the enterprise capability model, right? Now, when we have that, if you recall, as we're coming towards change, we talked about change being baseline plus delta. So we baseline business and enterprise, and now we need to, if any change there is, we do the gap analysis, compare, find the gap or delta in comparison to the baseline. We look at the baseline and find the deltas, and then we need to do heat mapping and all those exercises in order to define our priorities and a good roadmap to do that. And while we do all this, we need to improve our capabilities, our knowledge in terms of the enterprise architecture and digital method and framework. Let's call it ePerspectives in this case, right? I break it always, and I recommend this. If you're going to do that, always have two separate streams. One of them only focuses on tool, that is to say agnostic to method, like how do I install this, how do I import, export, and all those things with the tooling, right? Focus on tooling, whereas the other one is focused on method and how we use the tooling within the method. So in it involves a different set of knowledge. In fact, people who have architecture knowledge and such should be in that one, in the red one, whereas the green one can be people who only know the tool and can install it, can do the tool-related things with it. So these two are capabilities that we progressively need to bring in-house and improve and mature better and better. So as we do that, our capabilities for doing a digital transformation as well as future digital projects will be much more enhanced. So a typical project, what does it look at? On the business perspective, we look at, this is what we call digital foundation. So I have been involved in several of these engagements. For example, you have anything, depending on the size, anything between 8 to 10 to 16 to 20 weeks in order to do a digital foundation. But again, this is not for the whole enterprise, so you could do that holistically in a different way. But what we do here, the timing really depends on scope and size. But what we do here is we do this accelerated. So we first look at, okay, let's go and see the business strategy. Do you have it? Who did it? Are those documents available? How easy and fast is it to distill that into an X matrix? And so we can have that SCM, strategic capability model, mapped into KPIs, right? If it's really simple, fantastic. This phase will be ticked off very fast. Otherwise, we need to do accelerated. So So we typically do X matrix workshops, business canvas workshop to quickly distill the strategy and devise a strategic capability model that is mapped into an X matrix. Next is business design. So again, many places they do have a business capability model. Now, a lot of times it's not accurate, it's not reliable. There are good industry standard business capability models we can start with, so as default, but whichever way, if it's not there, we have to develop it very fast, doing accelerated business process modeling, customer journey modeling, and capability modeling, very accelerated. But if it's available, then we need to adjust and look at what we have until we stabilized a baseline business capability model. right? Then we go and the team starts looking at the enterprise perspective, where we start doing the, as I mentioned, 4+1 mapping. So normally you have people on the project, each one of them going around focusing on organization, technology, data, different aspects that they're involved with, and they try to do the mapping. Obtain that data, profiling. If it's not there, they have to go and do it. So for example, for this capability of payment, right, who do we have in the organization? If you have it, clear, great. These are the people in IT and these are people in business who work with payment, for example. These are the profiles and names and everything. Fantastic. Org model. Fantastic. If we don't have it, we have to go extract it and devise it and bring it. So we get that third link also mapped, which is the organization side. And last, we need to look at all the change portfolio. So we look at that and say, let's bring it and say, map it for this for each capability. So we need to know what is happening, what is planned to be happening or already happening with regards to that capability somewhere in the organization. So we are not oblivious to that as we devise and define new approaches and roadmaps, for example, for something that may have already been done or somebody has progressed a lot. So as mentioned here, again, we devise the current mapping, so 4+1 model of the business capability to those four aspects of technology, business, organization, and change, right? And then as we do that, we do the current, stabilize this, baseline it, and then we look at the target. This is a function of the enterprise perspective or the enterprise architecture team. They devise the target operating model, like what is our future technology resourcing, but etc. to have in place. And as that happens, what we do is the business case part is really, I insist always, because I am religiously against projects when they drop a lot of PowerPoints and impressive knowledge and know-how on people, and mechanically everybody does stuff, and normally not many know what they're doing, and in the end normally we don't get great results. So this is important for everybody at this point to compare the before and after, see that how things have changed, right? Mostly we've built a digital foundation, so we can at least say maybe we're not yet a digital company, but we are a digital foundation company that put the foundation right to become a digital company. So we can validate business case, see what are their priorities, look at the sponsors, do you see the value, ask those who were involved, see what the difference before and after, and hopefully in every case that I've been involved with, if that decision comes that this is really great, doing this digital foundation and making a huge progress for us, then we will go on and start looking at change perspective and devising a roadmap, and which often we extend from a project to a more encompassing program to do that more on the enterprise-wide and larger scale. This is what we're doing, and indeed I have been privileged enough to be part of these engagements. I am happy to share with you the great success stories we have had in top global organizations at the very strategic level. So back to this that you have seen before about how we go from each perspective to capture the data. In this picture, the data is captured in the XCM, X capability model is captured in Excel, but with using the tooling, we can get everything in Alphabet and Aris. So you can see the different parts of the method and what tool is relevant for them. In fact, really, it's business design that is the focus for Aris from the method point of view. The rest is very much in Alphabet. So this is what I recommended. Always when you take on a project like that, break it into two tracks. One focuses solely on tooling, not method related. The other one focuses on adopting the method with the tooling. So merging the two of them together, getting this best strength out of the both of them. As you can imagine, for the green track, number one, you just need tool experts, people who can do import or export and all that installation and all those kind of things with the tool. They don't need to know about method, but anybody in track 2 that works with the tooling needs to understand the method and framework. We break that into, like a adoption mobilization setup, which is common to, I guess, to every project. But then we have the tool setup. You see on the green, we have the tool setup. So a team can independently be there, install the tools, like do everything that is needed, licensing and all that stuff. So that make sure that the tool is there to be used. right? While the e-perspective on the method and tool on the content side, we'll be looking at what are the deliverables. Okay, let's make sure that we have the same reference model between our tool and our method. The lovely thing here is that ePerspectives and Software AG's tools, Alphabet and Aris, they are aligned, so they share the same reference model. But if you're using a different framework with a different tool, I would say please make sure that you have a common reference model and don't make it a religious exercise. Don't let the two sides fight it a lot, really. We need pragmatism. This is not about science of IT and architecture. No, this is all about delivering end results, really. So we look at the business strategy alignment, as I mentioned, that it's repeating twice for some reason, EA reference model, the business architecture, business design. So basically, what does that mean, all this? So we look at ePerspectives and its tooling. Since if the two of them are not aligned, then we need to make sure they're aligned. But if they are aligned, as this great case with ePerspectives and Alphabet Aris, then what we need to do is take that collective and look at the environment, the business where we're working with, and find out what are they doing, what is their EA reference model, how do they do business architecture and such, and by then comparing that to our target EA framework and method, hopefully ePerspectives, then we can adjust that so we can bring in the ePerspective knowledge when we look at training and enablement and other things eventually. So target definition, will be looking at target model, the gaps we need to fill in, and how we're going to sync the enterprise architecture content, everything that our method and framework tells us with the tooling. Again, in this case, we have the luxury that ePerspectives and Aris Alphabet are very much in tune. And so we start doing the transformation progressively. So in simple terms, we put somebody there to install it, a team to install the tools. We don't need for them to know about our method framework. We got another team, hopefully with our framework people and our tooling people, experts, going to the business that is in question, talking with their experts to make sure that hopefully if they're convinced with this target method and tool combination, that they can adopt it, they want to adopt it. So we do the adjustments that their current landscape of how they do things will be adjusted to our method and tool framework. We put things in place and we move forward progressively and mature this until our capabilities become much more optimized. So typically, this is an indicative sample. So these are the typical things we do in a project: setting it up, assess current state with prospective tooling, right? And then we need to look at the target state and develop the transformation roadmap. How do we bring in the tool and everything else for it into the picture, so that really work for us, so it doesn't become yet another time in another situation that we paid a lot of money for tools and methods and a lot of very impressive looking expensive consultants, but somehow we find that we may have even digressed rather than progressed. So I've worked with this plenty. So these are the different ways of looking at this. So you look at ePerspective on one side, and you focus on how you execute the projects on the other, and then we bring them together. So I have been with clients with where we do this actually. So we bring in a first project, we see the result. We do this incrementally before we expand into a program and more comprehensive, when everybody's convinced that there is value there. And as we do that and as we conduct projects, people will get more experience after the first or second. Typically, a rule of thumb is I recommend for the first project, it will be the outsider who knows it, consultants who know it. And then in the second one, it will be a joint kind of thing. Perhaps the external one might lead. And in the third one, then the external ones will be only on an advisory function, whereas the internal people will have learned it and be able to go and do it in projects. And there's a way to do training and enablement. And you could typically, I've really worked looking at this in a pragmatic way. So we know very well that many organizations, you go, there's not a budget, or you need to convince people, etc. It's not easy to mobilize. So it's not a good thing just to go around and come up with some ideal idea of, okay, if you give me tons of millions, then I can do great transformation for you. And after all that tons of millions have been spent, then hopefully they won't have a bigger problem than they started with. So this is one that basically says, set up your project, and JIT is for just in time. So really do it just in time if you're not going to do it institutionally. What does that mean? So just say what part of ePerspectives is for just in time. For example, you find out, okay, we're very poor with like a design side, or the solution architecture capability, or the change planning capability, some of those key things that we need to improve, or demand management, for example, for the enterprise architecture function, or governance for it and such. So we define a subset of the scope that is really tangible, that if you do those, we will find really tangible value. And then what we do, we define that, and in parallel, we design and plan a just-in-time enablement and training. So for example, if I'm the client, we devise a way that they can get just enough knowledge of ePerspectives and possibly the tooling if they're going to use it. But we really have a good way to shield those who don't have to away from it. So those who need to focus, for example, on the method side of it, they can delegate the responsibility to some tool expert. This is how we do it anyway. When you look at the XCM, X capability model, there's only one custodian, and that's with the enterprise architecture function. No more people can run to things and just change them and have access all over the place. This is where they define who will have what access to what and to what extent. So again, we have a just-in-time enablement and training, and we define the project, and then we have just in time, again, just enough, if you will, of enterprise perspective, knowledge, and know-how that is needed for doing this project. So we do the enablement for that project, so make sure that people know how to use it on a given project. Again, I am always religiously against these academic methods and framework, throwing a lot of PowerPoint or books at people and say, if you're smart, you'll be successful. And if they fail, they say, well, you were not that smart and you should have listened to me. But, don't believe everything you hear in there. So we need to make sure that enablement is there in place. So we plan a first project, and typically you can get one pilot project. So one project, it can either be on EA method and tool adoption solely, or you can also use an actual project where you're doing something and use the method to test it. And as you do that, you execute the project. You have some people who have knowledge, experts of tool and the method, but also you have people from the business that have now learned enough. They will be there following the project. They will learn, and as the projects unfold, their knowledge will go higher and higher, so that they can start executing this. On that note, I would like to thank you. I hope this presentation has been useful for you. The various different elements and components that you see on ePerspective, they're all on EA Transform and scheduled to have each one of them to have their own documentation, example, best practice, as well as videos. So look forward to seeing you on eatransform.com, and feel free at any time to drop me an email if you have an interesting challenge or situation that you would like to discuss. I'm Arsalan Rad. Thank you for today.